I'm Tanner Olson, and welcome to another episode of Walk a Little Slower, a podcast where I share a little hope, a little love, and a little bit of what I've been learning. This is a podcast where you are invited to slow down, to lean in, to hold fast, and to eventually keep going. Welcome. Hello. Today's episode is going to be just a little bit different. I have a guest. I will be joined by my friend Holly Oxhandler. Holly is a licensed master social worker and is the author of the book, The Soul of the Helper, 7 Stages to Seeing the Sacred Within Yourself so you can see it in others. This is a book that gives helpers and caregivers permission to stop, reconnect with the stillness in their souls, and renew their capacity to help others by helping themselves. Holly is a good friend, someone who I have known for several years. Her work has impacted me. It has inspired me and encouraged me to keep going, to keep writing, to keep digging. And so I'm excited for her to be the very first guest on the Walk a Little Slower podcast. I really think that you're going to not only enjoy this conversation, but enjoy her book as well. And you can find that in the show notes connected to this episode. So I won't waste any more time. This is my interview, my conversation with my good friend Holly. And stick around towards the end of the podcast episode. She shares two poems that are her favorites. So with that, here is my conversation with Holly. I never know exactly how to start interviews. So I figure if I just say I don't know how to start interviews, then that's the start of the interview.
There you go.
I should say interview. This is a conversation. This is a conversation.
It is. Yes.
So
yes.
For those who are listening, will you share with us a little of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, Tanner, I'm so honored to be here with you. It's so fun to actually see you and just to have the opportunity to get to chat with you. So for listeners, my name is Holly, or Dr. Holly Oxhandler. I'm the Associate Dean for Research and Faculty Development at Baylor University's Garland School of Social Work. And I study the intersection of spirituality and mental health. I co-host a podcast called CXMH, which is a podcast on the intersection of faith and mental health, which Tanner has been a guest on multiple times at this point. And yeah, I live in Waco, Texas. I've been married for like a little over 10 years. We have 2 kiddos, Callie and Oliver. And I just had a book come out called The Soul of the Helper. So
yes. And that's why you're on the podcast for a lot of reasons. But the book, The Soul of the Helper. But you went so fast over. You just were like, I'm a
Sorry,
doctor.
my friend.
I have all these letters around my name.
Oh.
I think you just. I'm very proud of all the work that you've done, and it's super cool. As somebody who has no letters around their name, which I'm very proud of that, by the way. But I think that's really awesome. So I'm excited to have you on the podcast as my first official guest.
Oh my gosh. Such an honor.
To share about the book, The Soul of the Helper, 7 Stages of Seeing the Sacred Within Yourself so that you can see it in others, which is a awesome title for a book. How did the title for the book come? Yeah, how did the title of the book come out?
Yeah. So I would say that, and you probably know this too from your own writing experience, that the title can go through lots of different phases and shifts and shapes and changes. Or maybe yours was exactly the same the whole way through. No. I don't know, but mine changed. But it always had this essence around these stages of seeing the sacred within yourself so that you can see it in others. And the soul of the helper kind of evolved over time. I think at one point we had Namaste Theory, like as the heading, or something about Namaste was in there, which I know we'll talk about. But really what I love when we landed on the soul of the helper is that it really encapsulates both the mental health side, the psychology side that is in this book, as well as the spiritual side. Because for our listeners, fun fact, psyche, the translation actually is soul. And in psychology, and in mental health fields, this area of faith and spirituality is an important part of many folks' lives. And so that's kind of where the soul piece came in. And then with helper, this book is really written to serve everyday helpers, regardless if they are caregivers or partners or parents or teachers or authors or speakers or, just anyone who is in one way, shape, or form serving others. That's really what I was wanting to write this book, or who I was wanting to write it for. Just recognizing all of the ways in which folks are serving others, especially these days.
Yeah. When you were writing it, were you thinking like, well, this is a book that is for everyone, even for those who don't think it is for them?
Yeah, yes. I know
Yeah.
that, I'm very aware that, when we write books, we really have that target audience that we are specifically thinking about, as we're
Hmm.
writing the book. And for me, it originally started with mental health care providers and faith leaders and volunteers kind of working
Hmm.
within those spaces. But over time, it very quickly became clear that no, this really is for the everyday helper. And even though
Yeah.
mental health care providers and faith leaders may catch the vision for this book and understand it because they are living at this intersection on a day-to-day basis, the reality is so are each of us.
Hmm.
I talk in this book about the prevalence of mental health struggles, as well as the prevalence of those who identify as being spiritual. And it really is a vast majority of us in both of those areas.
Hmm.
And so we really are all kind of living at this intersection, and we're all serving others in one way,
Hmm.
shape, or form. So,
Yeah. And I
yeah.
think from season to season too, people will see. I'm thinking of the people who may not necessarily be married or have children, or maybe they're just someone
Mm-hmm.
who's just very focused in on their job, and they're
Mm-hmm.
like, "Well, this really isn't for
Mm-hmm.
me. I'm very focused on work and all the things that I do." But I think then there's
Yeah.
these seasons of your life where you then find yourself in the role of the helper, where that
Yeah.
maybe it is now you are in a relationship, or you're taking care of parents who are uh, coming towards the end of their life. Like, so there
Mm-hmm.
is, I think, as I'm reading this book, and as I told you before we started, I was like, I have
Mm-hmm.
not finished the entire book, but
That
that's
is
because every time I pick
okay.
up and read it, I get inspired or I drift off into thinking of
Aw.
something else. And also, I'm just really bad at finishing books. Like, if I ever finish a
Aw.
book, like, I think I need a trophy. Um, but,
I'll send
but,
over some gold stars for you, friend. For each book that
but,
you finish, you can put a gold star on it.
well, I don't think you're going to be sending me a lot of gold stars. If you were to send me gold stars for the books that I've started or books that I have ordered,
Oh,
that's a
well, I don't
different.
have enough
That's
gold
different.
stars for that. Yeah.
Right. I just, it's just one of those things where I start reading it, and like as I'm reading your book, I just like, oh, and then there's this, and there's this, and one of the things that stopped me
Mm,
yesterday as I was reading, is you quote Fred Rogers. So you quote Mr.
I
Rogers, thinking
do.
about, and when I
Yeah.
hear the word helper, which is it's
Yeah.
the center word of the book cover. When I hear that,
Yeah.
I either go towards Enneagram twos, the helper,
Mm-hmm.
or I go
Mm-hmm.
to this quote from Mr. Rogers, and he says,
Mm-hmm.
my mother would say to me, look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping. To this day,
Mm,
especially in times of disaster, I remember my mother's words, and I am always comforted by realizing that there are still so many helpers, so many caring for people in this world. Can you talk just a
yeah.
little bit about helpers and caregivers?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yes. First of all, I love that you brought up that quote. And I so adore Fred Rogers, and
Hmm.
his presence is just threaded throughout this book in ways that I hope really honor his legacy.
Hmm.
Yeah. When I'm talking about helpers and who the helpers and the caregivers are, I think you're right to think about the Enneagram twos, or those folks
Hmm.
who most identify with that number on the Enneagram, those folks who are motivated deeply to serve others, and they just want to serve and love others, and they struggle too with receiving love, which is kind of woven in this. But But aside from the Enneagram, these helpers and caregivers, we think oftentimes with caregivers about those who are caring for parents or aging individuals, or caregivers who are caring for individuals who have a spectrum of varying abilities and are unable to care for themselves. But I really do want folks who see themselves as teachers who are
Mhm.
serving others, those who, in that Fred Rogers quote, those folks who are serving during seasons of crisis, which,
Mhm.
we look over the last 2 years and even where we are right now, and we see that there are so many folks who are on the front lines serving others, and they may be the physicians in the ER who are serving COVID patients or their family members. It could be the first responders who are supporting others, when they're in, the worst day of their lives. It could be, I even think about, when I think about like helpers, I'm even thinking about like the baristas, right? Right? Like, I mean, I worked at Starbucks for 5 years, and I know that, even though I was like, 21 years old, and like, I may
Mhm.
not have thought of myself as a helper. The reality was there was a base note behind the work that I did, even as a
Yeah.
barista, that knew that what I was doing was serving others and having some kind of impact on their day. So
Did you work the morning shifts? Did you have
I
those
did.
ones opening?
Well, I mean, I had seasons where I did the morning shift and I had seasons
Yeah.
where I did the night shift, but the mornings were my favorite. Yeah.
I also got to be a barista, and
Oh, I love that.
I have worked in churches, I have worked for camps, I have done after
Mm-hmm.
school care. I have done a lot of jobs. The job where I felt like I was doing the Lord's work to the fullest was to give
Mm.
people their first cup of coffee in the morning,
Oh my
because
gosh.
those people come in
Amen.
and they
Yep.
are not alive or awake.
Yeah,
And
that's right. That's
when you
right.
give them
Yep.
coffee, they're like, "You have helped me start my day. You have
Yes,
given
that's
me a
right.
reason to keep going and
That's
to continue."
right.
And I just was like,
And
I remember that. Yeah, it's so
I
funny.
love
It was
that.
a rough job because they weren't nice
Yes.
when they got there,
No,
but
no, no,
when you
no.
handed them the coffee,
That's right.
it was
Yes.
like you met one person and then you were saying goodbye to another person. It's
I
very
know.
interesting.
Yes.
Very interesting.
Yes. No, I totally hear you. And I remember too, like, not only the weight of like you're giving them their first cup of coffee, but for some of these folks, you are the very first person that they are
Hmm.
interacting with for the day. And
Yeah.
that matters. So,
Hmm.
like, just going back to your questions around the helpers and caregivers, like, yes, like we when we think of caregivers, we've kind of walked through those different roles. But I do want folks to widen their scope and really
Hmm.
see that it is anyone who is serving another human being in one
Yeah.
way, shape, or form that is unique to the
Hmm.
ways in which they were equipped to serve
Hmm.
others.
Yeah. And when I think about, like, again, the word helper, like, I kind of go towards Mr. Rogers to Fred Rogers, and I also can't help but think about Jesus. And when I think about them, the word humility keeps coming up in my mind, and also how
Mm-hmm.
they were always patient and slow. Like, the videos of from
Yes.
the Mr. Rogers neighborhood, where he like asks
Mm-hmm.
a question and then there's silence. He leaves space for silence, and
Yes.
he's a calming presence that is very much present. And it
Mm-hmm.
is, and I see that when I read through the stories of the gospel too, where Jesus is very
Mm-hmm.
present with the people that he's with, and he brings with him humility and kindness, and he creates a space for them, which in all the conversations I've had with you, that's one of the things that not only do you talk about, but you're good at, is you're able to kind of create a space
Oh.
that says, well, it's the whole the idea of, I in one of my poems I say the two sweetest words are welcome home. And if somebody can
Mm.
um, like give off that, I don't want to say aura because that's a weird thing to say, but if you give off the aura of welcome home,
Mm.
it's a really beautiful and calming thing. So
Oh, thank you,
um,
Tanner. I
so you
appreciate that.
mentioned that there was an idea for the title to be the Namaste Theory, and this is something that you talk about in the book. When I hear the
Uh-huh.
word Namaste, I think of yoga, and I think about
Uh-huh.
the couple of times I've tried to do yoga, and it was just the most painful thing. The
Oh
next day, I
no.
was just
Oh
I was
no.
terribly sore. But for what do you mean when you talk about when you say the Namaste Theory?
Yeah, yeah. I thank you for asking about that. Um, Yeah. Do you mind if I just give a brief backstory on some of the research? I won't get too technical, I promise,
Oh,
but at least
go
like
for it.
the
I'm
story
here for
behind
it.
it, because
Well,
that
I'm
helps.
interested in it because when I hear, like I said, when I hear the word namaste, I'm like, my mind
Uh-huh.
goes somewhere else, but I think you're going to take it in a different direction.
Yeah, just a little bit, but
Okay.
I may bring in
Yes.
some of what you were talking about. But so just to kind of set the stage for our listeners. So as I mentioned, the lot of the research that I do is on this intersection of spirituality and mental health. And as I have learned over the years that mental health clients tend to prefer that their faith be integrated into mental health treatment. Um, we know that over about 80% of folks identify as being spiritual. We know that actually, even though the National Alliance on Mental Illness says that 1 out of 5 of us are currently struggling with a mental health condition, we know that over 80% of us will meet criteria for a diagnosable mental illness at some point in our lives. And so this is something we, kind of collectively are navigating as part of being humans.
Mm-hmm.
So both of these areas of our lives are really important. And so as I've looked into this, particularly among mental health care providers and trying to understand, like, you know, what are mental health care providers' views? How open are they to talking about their clients' faith, knowing that clients prefer to talk about it, and that when we integrate clients' faith into treatment, it actually, the research shows that the treatment is either as effective, but in most cases it's actually more effective than if we were to completely ignore this area of clients' lives.
Mm.
And so I really wanted to understand, like, well, what is happening in mental health care then? I found that these mental health care providers, they tended to have really positive views around integrating their clients' faith, but they weren't doing it as often. And that the top predictor, so the thing that, really is kind of driving behind, whether or not they're integrating their clients' faith, is how motivated the mental health care provider was to live out their own faith. So
Mm.
that was fascinating to me. And I paid attention to that, and I started looking at some of the other research within like psychology and in counseling, and more research in social work and marriage and family therapy, just these other mental health fields. And I found a similar pattern, so that the more motivated the provider was to live out their faith, the more likely they were to integrate their client's faith. So, going back to your question about this word namaste, I too, when I was in grad school, is when I first started doing yoga, and I remember the teacher ending each session with this term namaste, but I
Mm-hmm.
only like vaguely knew what it meant. And so
Mm-hmm.
I really wanted to get to the cultural roots and origins of this Sanskrit term. It literally translates to mean "I bow to you." But more
Mm.
generally, we understand it to mean the sacred within me recognizes the sacred within you, or the divine in me, or the image of God within me honors the
Mm-hmm.
image of God within you. And as I really dug more into the cultural roots of this term, I understood that this is kind of what I was seeing happening within my data, that the more the mental health care provider was, the more connected they were to the sacred within themselves, the more likely they were to pay attention to the sacred within their client. So that's kind of where Namaste Theory was born and written about in 2017. But as I've kind of like lived into it and talked with other helpers, I've just realized this theory is not just for mental health care providers. It
Mm-hmm.
truly is for helpers in general, including many of the ones that we've already talked about.
Mm-hmm. And when we look at the last 2 years, or even as I'm growing older, I just see how, and I talk about this all the time, and it's not groundbreaking by any means, but just how heavy and hard and difficult
Yeah.
and weird life
Yeah.
is. And I don't think
Yes.
I don't know if that's something that we don't talk about enough. Maybe we talk about it too much, but like life is just a really, really hard thing. And then when life is hard, it's
Mm-hmm.
also I have found as someone who follows Jesus, it is also hard to find time to take care of not only my mental health, but also my
Yeah.
relationship with God, finding that time
Yeah.
to sit and to pray and to read scripture and to worship. It's difficult, especially when the
Yeah.
noise around is loud and when life just feels heavier than it usually is. Um,
Mm-hmm.
how have you seen, and this might be a strange question, but you mentioned like when a mental health care worker or provider is uh, when their spirituality or when their faith is more foundational, do you think that they're more effective as a caregiver then for
Mm.
those who are sitting with them or seeing them as a client or patient?
That's a good question. So one point just to clarify is that, what we've seen is that the more motivated the provider is to live out their faith, like they
Yeah.
really feel like, they're deeply connected with their faith and it is
Hmm.
kind of the driving force behind everything that they do. That's when they're more likely to integrate their client's faith.
Hmm.
So I think that what's really important and key is that the provider be deeply aware of what it is that they believe in,
Hmm.
regardless of what they believe in. Because,
Hmm.
as a social worker, we really want to honor the diversity of different
Yeah.
faith traditions and backgrounds. I know you disclosed as identifying as Christian. Similarly, the same is true for
Hmm.
me, that is my background is in Christianity and both Catholicism and Protestant Christianity. But I think really the key is that the mental health care provider spend that
Hmm.
time of carefully tending to and recognizing what it is that they believe in, why they believe what they believe in, and just cultivating that space to get curious about their inner landscape in this area so
Hmm.
that, they can comfortably hold that space for their client, regardless
Yeah.
of what the client comes in believing in.
Hmm.
They have that groundedness within
Yeah.
themselves of what they believe in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just recognizing maybe pulling in questions like, you know, what is God saying to you in this season? Or how is
Mm,
what is your faith like uh, in this hard time, or whatever it may be. But I think that's really important. That's cool. I don't think we think
yeah.
about that a lot. We're just like, oh, like I don't go to a doctor because he is like he understands my faith or integrates my faith into how my broken arm is healing. But we do that when
Yeah.
it comes to when we're taking care of the soul, when we're taking care of like what's happening or
Yes.
going inside ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yep.
Describe for us the journey of seeking the sacred, because you mentioned that when talking about the Namaste theory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I talked about the research, and as it kind of began to surface, and I was talking with other helpers about this, I realized that, well, what I'll say is that as researchers, our research changes us. Like anyone
Yeah,
who says otherwise, I don't know that I believe them. So
yeah.
I would love to have a
Your
conversation.
work should
Yeah.
change you. Yeah.
Yes, it
Yes.
changes
Yes.
you. That's right.
Well,
And so,
and that I'm going to interrupt you because
no,
I
please,
see that
it's
a lot
fine.
too. We're having a conversation. This is not an interview.
That's right.
Um,
No.
but like after college, a lot of my friends they went on to get master's degrees, and I
Hmm.
was
Hmm.
completely done with college.
Hmm.
And some became pastors and doctors and professors and all these different things,
Hmm.
and their work obviously has changed them. And I went into writing, and that for me
Yeah.
has changed everything
Oof.
about my life. It's not my identity,
Yes.
but it's changed
Right.
exactly how I interact with this and with this
Yes.
and with you and with
Yes.
everyone. And I'm sure the
Yes.
same is for you as well, because
Yes.
we're as different as our jobs may be, it is a lot of soul work. It is a lot of
Yeah, it
sitting with
is.
what is and feeling the
Yeah.
weight and the heaviness of it, and
Yeah.
not giving not giving an answer or finding a way out, but finding ways
Yeah.
to kind of live with it and then to
Yeah.
take the next right step forward. So,
That's right.
yes,
That's
your
right.
work certainly has to change you, and I'm sure this book changed
Yes.
a lot for you.
Oh, yes, it did. Oh, yes, it absolutely did.
Yes.
I mean,
Okay, so back
yeah.
to the sacred.
Yes.
Yes.
No, 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 no. It's good. I love that you said all of that. And I appreciate you sharing about how the work has changed you. And I just want to note too, yes, having folks who get degrees along the way, all it is training. It doesn't change, like you
Hmm.
said, it doesn't change our identity. We are our identity, and as I write about in this book, that we are beloved
Yeah.
as we are. Those degrees, those achievements, they don't define us. This
Hmm.
is just the journey that we are on. And so
Hmm.
this journey though of seeking the sacred, it really started to bubble up and surface like as I was leaning into and allowing the research to change me and embody this research and thinking like, if this is what is happening in this particular setting, and I'm seeing that this is happening for helpers in general as they wake up to the sacred within themselves and the ways in which they're better able to see that in others, like what does that mean for me and my own journey? And how have I maybe already been on that path even before the research? And then how does the research change me moving forward? So this, so these stages, there's 7 of them. They are, I'll say them quick and then I'll explain like how they're all connected. But the 7 stages are speed, slow, steady, still, see, shift, and serve. And the heartbeat that kind of threads them all together is this understanding that we need to wake up as fellow helpers to the speed at which we are operating, completely unaware so often, right? To then be able to slow down, to identify those steadying structures that support us and offer scaffolding for us to stay in that slower pace so that we can then actually be still, which is so hard for a million reasons. I appreciate the solidarity on that one.
Oh, yeah.
But it isn't, I mean, the reality though, is it isn't until we are still that we can really and truly see the sacred within ourselves. And then once we see the sacred within that we did nothing to earn, that we did nothing to hustle for, that was prepackaged within us before we were born, then we are invited to shift with self-compassion, or with compassion toward ourselves and towards others, as we then go out and serve the sacred within ourselves and those around us. So that's kind of the whole arc of this journey. And it's absolutely, I mean, it's certainly not linear. It has to be linear in order to be in a book. But the reality is that we go through these stages, but we will bounce back from one stage to another at certain points along the journey. And that's just part of it. So, yeah.
That's good. One of the reasons why I started this podcast was, kind of going over the 7 things you just said. A lot of it was just like to invite you to slow down. But another reason was I kept getting a lot of questions about writing a book and releasing books and all of the ins and outs of all of that. So I'm going to ask you a very broad question about that. What was the we kind of talked a little bit about the writing process where it was just a lot. But for you, what was releasing this book like?
I know we were talking about it just before hitting record. It's still, every time I hear the question, it's like, there's a weight to it, right? Because it's complex. I will say that the process of releasing the book has been tender, and it has been, I'm thankful that it's been in alignment with my core values of love and integrity. I am grateful that, even though maybe some of my practices, my contemplative practices that I write about have had to wobble a little bit in this season, like there's still a core base note of who I am and who this book is that is just able to launch out with consistency. It's been really sweet seeing it intersect with other people and their journeys, because I know, like, I will say that the process of writing the book really and truly was the reward. Like, I love seeing it get out there, but the fact that I got to wake up each morning really early just to spend time with this book and let it shape me for about 3.5 years, like that was the gift. And so to see it go out there into the world, there are like practical things in terms of like trying to, connect with folks and, get the book kind of in front of certain folks. But I'm just thankful that it has, that through the whole process, it has felt in alignment with who I am. Like,
that's really sweet.
Yeah. I don't know if that answers your question. I'm hoping it does, but it's, I mean, I could go into like the technical, like here's 5 steps of things that worked, but that's not at my core what it has, that's not been what's most important,
Right. Yeah.
it's been staying connected with my core values through the
Hmm.
process of the launch. Yeah.
And I think if I was somebody listening to this podcast and you had just said, I could give you the 5 things, I would be like, I want to hear that. But also I think
Mm,
that is one of those things that it's different for everybody. And
absolutely. Yes.
if when you
Yes.
take a step down the road of writing and releasing and
Yes.
publishing or self-publishing,
Yes.
like you
Yep.
will find out those things for you. And
Yep.
as someone who's put out a couple of books, I
Mm-hmm.
have learned something or 5 somethings or 10 somethings with every release, and I've gotten more and more comfortable with it. Um,
Yeah,
but
that's
yeah,
good. Well, and
as yeah.
too that launching a book in COVID. So I didn't even mention
Oh.
that. Like, like just launching a book period, but then doing it in the midst of COVID and
Hmm.
what that has been like has been, that just adds a whole other layer to
Yeah.
it of
Hmm.
gosh, everybody is exhausted and tired and like, yes, I'm really excited about this book, but I want to be mindful of where
Yeah.
folks are in terms of their exhaustion and
Yeah.
fatigue. And also, I can't do all the fun in-person things that I had really hoped for.
Yeah.
The book was delayed like a month or two
Hmm.
because of COVID and shipping delays and supply chains and blah blah blah. But at the end of the day, it's just, it's good. It's out there.
Yeah.
So yeah.
As you're talking about writing the book and how it has changed you, I think that's what it is, right? And when I think back on
Yeah.
the things that I've gotten to write and then release, for me, it's people are like, why would I want to buy this book? And my answer is, well, this book has invited
Mm,
me into something better, and now may it do the same thing for you.
yes. Amen.
And that's the
Yes.
hope, is that like when they
Yeah.
read through the 7 things, when they sit with these pages and these quotes and the stories, the personal stories that you share in
Mm,
this book, I hope that it's one of those things where it's, wow, this person has kind of gone before me in this direction, and they're
mm,
sharing with me the hard, the heavy, and the good things that have all come out of that. Now let
yeah.
this change me and my steps as well. Not that it's going to
Yes.
make everything
Yes.
better, but it might
Right.
make things just a
Exactly.
little bit lighter. And I think that's
Yes.
that's important too.
Oh, I
Um,
really appreciate that. Yeah, this
yeah,
this is definitely the book that 10 years younger version of me would have very much appreciated. But
yeah, yeah,
and I don't even know that it's an age thing. I think it's just the fact that there are certain seasons of life that, we just need those reminders.
yeah.
So, yeah.
Good. Well, it's full of really, as far as I've read so far. I don't want to be like, I've read the entire
Mm.
book. That would be a lie. But I will get a gold star when it happens.
Awesome. Yes,
But
you
it's
will.
but the things that I'm reading in there, like I said, it has brought me to a place where I get to pause and reflect on it. And I think when you read something that allows you to put the
Mm.
book down, it's just as good as a
Yeah.
book that makes you want to keep reading it. Like putting it
Yeah.
down to think about it, not putting it down
Yes.
because I cannot read it.
Right, right,
So
right, right. Yep.
yeah. So, anyways,
No, I hear you.
congratulations on
Thank
the book.
you. Thank
Where
you.
can
Thank you.
people find you, connect
Yeah.
with you, and get the book?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you. So folks can find me. My website is hollyoxhandler.com, and I'm on any social media at hollyoxhandler. Folks can get the book wherever they buy their books. It's on Amazon, and they can get it from Templeton Press's website. There's a discount over there that folks can get. So yeah. So, and then I've got all the other links on my website. If they
Mhm.
go to thesoulofthehelper.com, it'll take them straight
Awesome.
to where the book is. Yeah. So,
Cool. Well, I will link your website in the show notes on this
mm,
podcast episode. Before you go, though, you had
yes.
a very important job. I asked you
Yeah.
last minute
No,
to, if you could
it
share a
actually,
poem. Yeah.
yeah, I was going to say it actually wasn't that last minute. I just took a lot of time because it is very hard for me to decide which poem,
Hmm.
because poetry is just, it's life changing. And
Yeah.
the stack of poetry books I have is just, yeah. So is it okay if I actually do two? Is that
I would
okay?
love that. Yes, I
Oh
would
my
love
gosh,
that.
thank you. So I had a really hard time with this. First, I'm going to read a Tanner Olson poem. And I was really torn between, one is Your Reminder, which
Mm.
is probably one of my favorites, but and I have that sticker on my planner still of that. But the one I'm actually going to read is Coffee, because I think I told you this. When I read this poem, I wept the first time
Mm.
because it is exactly my experience of writing before the
Mm-hmm.
sunrise and watching the
Mm-hmm.
sunrise. So I'm going to read this one, if that's okay.
Great. I look forward to it.
I've got stained teeth and burnt breath, but a beat that's staying alive in my chest. I've been waking up early to sit with the sunrise and watch your beauty meet my barely open eyes. The light breaks through, reminding me I can make it through. And it's the first morning sip that reminds me of grace and what I can only imagine is a smile on your face. And for a moment, it's just you and me and a cup of coffee, watching the waking world beginning to be. The other morning, I read, "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed, and I am beginning to see I do not need to see you to believe you are with me." You are with me. And it's almost as if every sit brings us together. And if that brings us together, we'll never be apart. I love that one. I'm like tearing up just reading it now. Thank you. All right. So that's the first one. How was it actually? How is it hearing somebody else reading it?
It's good. You read it differently than I do, which is what I was hoping you would.
Good.
You read it a lot slower than I do. But that's because I'm just a fast talker, especially when it comes to poetry. But I think you read it. And that's the thing about poetry is it is what I think, and this is where I get artsy with my writing. What I write is often what I need to write, but what I'm also writing is I'm writing it for other people. And then when you hand that to them, they get to do whatever they want to do with it. And so they can read it fast, they can read it slow, they can cross out a word. Like it is, that's one of the difficult things is what you have created then becomes a gift for the world, and they get to do with it as they please. And so there is no incorrect way for you to read what I wrote. There is only an incorrect way for me to respond to the way that you read what I wrote.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. But yeah. I'm so grateful for your poetry.
Thank you.
And the ways that it has helped shape me. So thank you for it.
Yeah, of course.
And thank you for allowing me to read a second. So the second one that I'm going to read is from Coleman Barks' translation of The Essential Rumi. This is one of Rumi's poems. He is a 13th century Persian poet. And this is a poem that I actually read to my students just about every semester at the beginning, because I want them to have this kind of in mind as they are going through the course. So this poem is called Two Kinds of Intelligence. And he writes, "There are two kinds of intelligence. One acquired as a child in school memorizes facts and concepts from books and from what the teacher says, collecting information from the traditional sciences as well as from the new sciences. With such intelligence, you rise in the world. You get ranked ahead or behind others in regard to your competence in retaining information. You stroll with this intelligence in and out of fields of knowledge, getting always more marks on your preserving tablets. There's another kind of tablet, one already completed and preserved inside you. A spring overflowing its springbox, a freshness in the center of the chest. This other intelligence does not turn yellow or stagnate. It's fluid, and it doesn't move from outside to inside through the conduits of plumbing learning. This second knowing is a fountain head from within you moving out." So that is the second poem.
That's really good. I feel like that really comes alongside your work really well.
Oh.
That poem just kind of screams you're sacred.
Oh,
so
thank you. Yeah.
Well, this was fun.
This was so fun, my friend.
Thanks for being my first guest on the Walk a Little Slower podcast.
Gosh, thank you for having me, and thank you for the good work you do, Tanner, because it really makes a difference in our world.
Well, and I'm excited. I've gotten to meet a lot of people on the internet, and I'm sure you have as well, but I haven't gotten to take a lot of those from internet acquaintances. there's like this weird
I know. The stages.
So you could be acquaintances to
yes.
we're friends to we're actually friends to no, we're for real friends. And I think we're in that no, we're for real friends.
Yeah.
So
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
Well, thanks for being a friend, a real friend, and
yes.
for the work that you do.
Too.
I hope that everyone goes and picks up your book. Also, when I first saw the cover of it, I thought, oh my gosh, that looks like a book that Oprah would hold up.
Oh, my friend, thank you.
And I don't know if it's because the O on it just kind of is like that Oprah O, but it just kind of looks like a book that Oprah would hold up and be like, you have to have this book. Look under your seats. That's what I think.
Oh my gosh,
the cover.
Man.
So, I hope that happens for you.
Maybe.
Oh, I hope so.
We'll see.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if Oprah sent you to this podcast.
I was going to say, let's have both. Let's have Walk a Little Slower and The Soul to Helper side by side
deal.
under. Yeah, that's right. Yes.
Well, if anybody is listening to this podcast because Oprah sent you here, we want to give a special shout out to Oprah. All right.
I love it.
I'm going to let you go. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the Walk a Little Slower podcast. Again, I know this episode was a little bit different, but I really wanted to share this conversation that I had with Holly with all of you. Her work has meant so much to me, and it continues to leave a lasting impression on myself, and I hope it does the same for you as well. In the show notes, you can find ways to not only connect with Holly, but purchase her book, and I really think that you should. I'll be back next Monday with another episode of the Walk a Little Slower podcast, and if you haven't yet subscribed, well, what are you doing? Subscribe. All right, I'll talk to you again real soon.